Phandelver. Oh god. If you like rock and roll music, you've probably heard of this little thing called Rush. Am I right?
What do you mean, like fast-paced rock?
No, like Rush. Like the band Rush.
I don't know them.
Exit the warrior, today's Tom Sawyer.
No!
They've got a lyric that I really like. It goes, "If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice." That goes for a lot of things in life, including this thing that we do, Dungeons and Dragons. Whether you like it or not, your D&D adventure is probably going to have a particular flavor to it. A tone, a mood. It probably has themes, and it probably fits into some kind of recognizable genre. Or maybe it's a dissonant mash of genres, for better or for worse. Now, you might be thinking, I don't care about those things. Like, what is this, English class? Themes? Symbolism?
Metaphors? I hate metaphors. That's why my favorite book is Moby Dick. No frou-frou symbolism, just a good simple tale about a man who hates an animal.
Look, if you just want to show up, roll some dice, and have a good old goofy time, that is fine. A lot of great music, for example, has come straight out of improvised jam sessions. And there is a risk of taking things too seriously. A lot of bands, in particular, create their greatest works early in their career, and then struggle once they try to move on to more serious, intellectual projects. We call that the sophomore slump. Other bands, once they've achieved their serious artistic vision, struggle to recapture that happy-go-lucky sound they had earlier in their careers. I'm looking at you, Obladi Oblada. We have to be careful not to lose sight of the fun. But there is a flip side to that too. The band that refuses to practice, because practicing isn't fun, man. The band that shows up to the studio too drunk or too high to record. The band that refuses to hear any constructive criticism because that's just so negative, man. The band that never makes it. You know, there's actually a great scene in Freaks and Geeks that exemplifies this perfectly.
I like it fast.
Hey, listen, guys. Listen, that wasn't very good. Let's try it again.
What?
Let's try Sunshine of Your Love again.
Well, we just played it, man. Why would we do it again?
Because it wasn't right, man. It was really sloppy, and it didn't really sound anything like the record.
On the one hand, we have Nick. He takes things way too seriously. He's judgmental. He's closed-minded. And he gets hung up on tiny little things that just don't matter that much.
I just want to play the song right, Daniel!
But on the other hand, we have Daniel. He's apathetic. He's lazy. He won't do it if it's hard or boring. And he cannot stand criticism.
You know, you and Yoko here turn music into school. What are you gonna do, start handing out band homework?
So let's do some critical analysis of The Lost Mine of Phandelver and try to strike a balance between these two extremes. Let's be observational. Let's be open-minded. Let's stay grounded. Let's look for things that can be tweaked, modified, customized, but let's also try to be aware of when it's best to leave well enough alone. In this video essay, we're going to be looking at tone, mood, themes, and genre. For each of these, I'll start by describing what I think these terms mean in the context of D&D. Then, I'll look at how that literary element is presented by default in The Lost Mine of Phandelver. Finally, I'll offer some ways they can be modified, improved, or customized to your own taste.
Oh yeah, I slapped the bass big time.
Tone is the attitude of the narrator. It may be naive.
My mom always said life was like a box of chocolates.
Cynical.
Rorschach's Journal, October 12th, 1985. Dog carcass in alley this morning. Dire tread on burst stomach.
Delusional.
To clean the trash can of society, I've chosen to become more than a man. I am the hero this town needs. I am the king.
Oh, those two are the same, actually. It may be detached.
With insomnia, nothing's real. Everything's far away. Everything's a copy of a copy of a copy.
Connected.
You could argue he'd done it to curry favor with the guards. Or maybe make a few friends among us cons. Me, I think he did it just to feel normal again. If only for a short while.
Or academic.
Concerning hobbits.
In the context of D&D, tone is established primarily by the way that you, as the DM, speak. How confident are you in your delivery? How quickly do you speak? Do you let tension build in pregnant pauses? Or do you keep things lighthearted with well-placed jokes? What words and expressions do you choose to use? Down-to-earth, everyday vocabulary? Or do you gild the lily with ornate speech? What references do you make? For example, in Fellowship of the Ring, we get this interesting line. The dragon passed like an express train, turned a somersault, and burst over Bywater with a deafening explosion. A bit anachronistic, but maybe acceptable if we imagine ourselves curled up in front of a crackling fireplace, listening to Grandpa Tolkien spin us a yarn. Would it have been better if he had stuck to in-universe references? Maybe. But I think we can all agree it wouldn't have been better if he described the dragon passing like an X-Wing from Star Wars. I've actually seen this kind of metatextual reference a lot at the D&D table. And in my opinion, it can be pretty immersion breaking. Tone is also affected by how the players speak at the table. Most D&D groups have, in their ranks, a wise guy who can't take anything seriously. And that's not a bad thing. But if you notice it undercutting serious moments, try not to let it get to you. Instead, laugh along with it. Let the moment happen. Take a deep breath and reset the scene with the tone you want to strike, even if it means repeating what you've already described. If that doesn't work and it becomes a real problem, have a frank discussion with your players. Ask them directly to buy into the tone you're trying to strike. Consider having a safe word for when someone at the table, DM not excluded, is seriously having a bad time. More than anything, though, mastering tone requires observation and practice. Take a moment to think about your natural default way of speaking. Does it match the kind of adventure you're trying to run? For example, are you like a total goofball that can't keep a straight face to save his life? Maybe don't try setting this adventure in a grimdark crapbox world. Do you speak in a disinterested monotone, dripping with contempt? Maybe don't try to set this adventure in a Studio Ghibli world. So what is the tone of Lost Mine of Phandelver? I won't spend too much time on this particular section for one simple reason. This adventure, like many adventures, is written in a very matter-of-fact way. The gray box text does include some evocative descriptions with fitting vocabulary, but it doesn't have a very strong voice per se. Does it sound like a world-weary old dwarf is narrating this story? No. Does it sound like a silver-tongued gnomish dramatist? Also, no. So it's going to be up to you to give your narration flavor and perspective. But one thing I will say about the gray box text in this module, it is earnest. Whether it's talking about a trap springing with a mighty roar and a huge surge of rushing water, or the orc menace at Wyvern Tor, or the protruding eye stalks and thick burbling voice of a strange green creature, it takes itself seriously. It seems to genuinely believe that this stuff is cool. And I think there's a lesson there. Be conscientious of sarcasm and self-deprecation. Both of these are very, very common for new DMs, and it's fundamentally a kind of control strategy. Like, I get it, we all want to be Eminem. Take the words out of our critics' mouths so they can't be used against us.
I am white. I am a f***ing punk. I do live in a trailer with my mom.
For a lot of us skinny white nerds, sharp wit was the only defense we had. But at some point, you gotta be strong enough to put that down. I am a much, much less sarcastic person than I used to be. Getting older is one reason why. A sarcastic teenager is a lot less likely to hurt somebody's feelings. But it's also because I've spent quite a bit of time in the DM seat. Sarcasm can make someone feel stupid, self-conscious, or defensive. Not a good recipe for collaborative storytelling. Likewise, self-deprecating humor undercuts the suspension of disbelief. I can't count the number of times I've heard a player say, "What's this NPC's name?" And the DM responds, "What do you think, I prepared or something? Screw it, we'll call him Bill." Or the players ask, "What's that over there?" And the DM goes, "We're just gonna skip that area because I'm a walking garbage bag full of dirty diapers and I did not prep anything for that." My advice is to be like Gandalf.
A wizard is never late, Frodo Baggins. Nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.
A DM is never unprepared. She improvises exactly what she means to. So if the NPC's name is Bill, then it's Bill. Say it with confidence and your players will believe that there's a reason why you named that NPC Bill. If you're not ready to run something, then just say that. "Hey guys, I'm not quite done prepping that area yet. Why don't you come back next session and it will be awesome." Mastering tone and finding your voice just takes practice. But I do encourage you to take a lesson from Lost Mine of Phandelver and be earnest if you can.
Doesn't sound reggae?
No.
Slap the bass.
Mood is the atmosphere of your story. It's established through lighting, weather and temperature, music, costuming, scenery, and smell.
It's the smell.
It should create a feeling in the audience, and indeed, in the characters themselves. That feeling could be gloomy and melancholic, terrifying, rebellious, awe-inspiring, whimsical, or peaceful. We as humans have a tendency to fixate on the negative, on the frightening, on the dire. But do not neglect the little moments of peace. If you create an atmosphere, occasionally, for your players, of tranquility, reflection, and calm, you might be very surprised how much they will give back to you. So what is the mood, or rather, what are the moods of Lost Mine of Phandelver? Unlike other adventures, such as Curse of Strahd or Spelljammer, Lost Mine of Phandelver does not have an omnipresent atmosphere. You can certainly give it one, especially if you're planning on taking this adventure in a darker or weirder direction later on. But rather, in The Lost Mine of Phandelver, individual areas have different moods rather than the adventure as a whole. Phandelver, for example, should be a lively, bustling town brimming with opportunity and adventure. The surrounding countryside should feel wild and untamed, with danger and opportunity over each new horizon. Coneybury should be an eerie, haunted place, shrouded in mist. And Wave Echo Cave should have a grandeur to it. The scale of the ruin itself and of what was lost should be awe-inspiring. In general, however, I do think this is an area of opportunity. Mood is a bit underdeveloped in Lost Mine of Phandelver, which means it's up to you to give this adventure and each individual scene some atmosphere. How do you do that? Start by reflecting on your inspirations. What drew you to D&D in the first place? Was it The Hobbit? Was it Alice in Wonderland? Princess Mononoke? These inspirations are going to color your work, whether you like it or not. So it's better to get ahead of things and think about how those stories establish their own unique atmospheres. When setting the scene, it's best to move from general to specific. Start with the time of day. Describe the weather and temperature. What do the surroundings look like? How are people in the vicinity acting or feeling? So on and so forth. But if there's a really striking detail, mention it first. Like, the first thing that catches your eye is your sister's smiling face amongst the crowd. Or alternatively, as soon as you walk through the door, the stench of blood makes your stomach turn. Sometimes, all it takes to establish a mood is one sufficiently evocative detail. You will, however, probably have to be quite blunt when establishing mood. And you will probably have to repeat yourself. Remember, your players can't actually hear that rolling thunder. They can't feel the rain soaking through their clothes. They can't smell that fresh-cut grass. So establish mood strongly and re-establish it often. Finally, what is the difference between tone and mood? Well, while mood, the atmosphere of the scene, may be influenced by the tone of the narrator, it is not the same as the tone of the narrator. Usually they complement each other, but occasionally they can contradict each other too. The attitude of the narrator may not actually match what the audience sees on screen. And this is a reminder of why media literacy is important. As audience members, there is a risk if we're not careful in how we interpret media. How much more important is it then for us to be thoughtful in our own creations? Be thoughtful. Because getting the right tone and mood can make or break a scene. And always remember, if you choose not to decide, you've still made a choice.
Slap at the bass. That sounded like Borat.
Yeah.
Themes are what the story is about. Not literally, but conceptually. Lord of the Rings, for example, is literally about a magical MacGuffin that's going to destroy the world or something, but metaphorically, I despise allegory in all its forms. It's not allegory, John Ronald Rutabaga Tolkien. It is not allegory to say Lord of the Rings is a story about friendship. If you asked Samwise Gamgee what his story was about, he would say friendship. If you asked Gimli what his story was about, he'd say the same thing. That's what themes are, and it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. And maybe that's a good rule of thumb. What would the characters in your story say it's about? They probably have a good idea. And for you, those people are your players. Which brings us nicely to the next point. Themes are not created, they are discovered. You cannot and should not try to force themes, because no plot survives contact with its characters. Indeed, that is precisely the difference between plot and story. If you set out to write a story about the power of, forgiveness, you're going to write a lousy story. But if, instead, you begin by writing about flawed characters that want opposing things very, very much, you might discover an incredible story about forgiveness along the way, or about revenge, or in the case of D&D, whatever your players give back to you. You won't know until you get there. That being said, we can make some general observations about Lost Mine of Phandelver, because we do know a few things about this story already. So, what are the themes of Lost Mine of Phandelver? Let's begin at the beginning. Phandelver's Pact. Long ago, diverse peoples with a common goal came to a mutual understanding and agreed to cooperate. This is a story about working together. Then we have this, a mysterious villain controlling a shadowy web of conspirators. The Black Spider's network is also diverse, but its leader is secretive, deceptive, and purely self-interested. This breeds distrust and disloyalty from top to bottom. Notice how quick Yemek turns on his master Clark. Notice how the bugbears treat the poor little goblin Droop. A house divided against itself cannot stand.
To be united by hatred is a fragile alliance at best.
Finally, we have the Rockseeker brothers. You would have to be deaf not to hear echoes of Thorin Oakenshield and the other dwarves from The Hobbit here. This should inspire themes of rediscovering one's roots, reclaiming what has been lost, and forging one's own legacy. But there is also a cautionary tale here about the potential cost of greed. Indeed, in our story, if Gundren and his brothers hadn't set out to find the lost mine in the first place, and thus led the Black Spider straight to it, all of this violence might have been avoided. Gundren's brothers might still be alive. So remember that when your tale comes to a close. Although victorious, there should be at least a brief moment of reflection on what that victory cost. Themes, of course, are subjective, though. Your ideas may be very different from my own. I'm sure someone is furiously typing in the comments that Lord of the Rings is actually about Zoroastrian nationalism in the context of 80s funk music, man. But I'd be more interested in your thoughts on the themes of Lost Mine of Phandelver. What is this story about conceptually to you? Let me know in the comments below.
Slap the bass. Big time.
That's better.
Genre is messy. Fundamentally, it is a way of categorizing media so the audience knows what to expect. Because it is a cultural understanding rooted in tradition and convention, and because it only really exists by reference to shared touchstones and tropes, genre is essentially arbitrary. It only takes one sufficiently influential work to enshrine a genre trope. Like, did pirates have peg legs before Long John Silver? Did cowboys wear ponchos before Clint Eastwood? Did lasers go pew 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 before Star Wars? Did before genre also depends on what we focus on. For example, which box does Game of Thrones go into? Fantasy, sci-fi, or historical?
We know what hole that goes
The
into,
triangle.
right?
Triangle.
That's right. The square hole.
And which box does Dune go into?
The arch. The arch.
You guessed it.
The arch.
It goes in the square hole.
Jokes aside, I think the fact that we categorize Game of Thrones as fantasy and Dune as sci-fi shows our genre definitions prioritize some things like magic, technology, even just aesthetics, more than other things like politics, history, religion, or social structure. But, and here's the important part, genres can mean very different things to different people. If your players show up expecting Kiki's Delivery Service and they get Game of Thrones, they're going to have a bad time. And if you, the DM, show up expecting Dune and your players give you Futurama, you're going to have a bad time. You gotta talk about this stuff with your players. So what genre is Lost Mine of Phandelver? On the surface, it seems, like most D&D, to be heroic medieval fantasy. Magic is up front and center. We've got knights in shining armor, dwarves, goblins, wizards. We've got dungeons and dragons. The aesthetic and technology is absolutely medieval coded, you know, in that inauthentic Ren Fair kind of way. But I think we can all agree that not every D&D adventure is just plain Jane fantasy, right? Curse of Strahd, for example, is just as much gothic horror as fantasy. Ghosts of Saltmarsh is a swashbuckling pirate tale. And these adventures are made better by leaning into those genre tropes. And, of course, by being careful not to undermine them too much. So, I will grant you that Lost Mine of Phandelver is a classic fantasy story. But is it exclusively a classic fantasy story? Well, what kind of story does this sound like to you? In an untamed land, a prospector seeks his fortune, digging for gold and hoping to strike it rich. A frontier town with no central authority is beset by a gang of outlaw thugs and seeks help from a ragtag bunch of misfits who must take justice into their own hands. It's the Seven Samurai! All kidding aside here, I hope you can see a few key similarities to the Western genre. Government is almost non-existent. There is no lord or ruler, just a bumbling, impotent town leader. There are no courts or prisons. And most importantly, there is no city guard. One of the worst ideas we get from video games is that around every corner is a soldier in full plate armor, waiting to arrest and imprison whoever breaks the law. Or that, like in GTA, there are limitless reinforcements of increasingly powerful police officers to keep the players in check. And one of the worst pieces of advice I see online is that when the PCs, or maybe just that guy, is doing something that the DM doesn't want him to, have the city guard show up and arrest them. Then have a high-level cleric cast Zone of Truth or Gesh on them. Not only is this using in-game solutions for out-of-game problems, like, seriously, just talk to your players about this stuff. But worse, it robs the players of the most meaningful experience we can have playing D&D, which is grappling with moral dilemmas and searching for the meaning of justice in an unjust world. As soon as the players can outsource that uncomfortable problem to literally anyone else and just get back to hitting things with sticks, they will. Don't let them. Force them to make difficult decisions and to live with the consequences. They might hate you in the moment, but they will thank you later when they look back on a truly memorable experience. So, is Lost Mine of Phandelver a Western? Aesthetically, no. There are no cowboy hats or chaps or spurs, no saloons or spittoons or high noons, Technologically, no. You will not find any steam trains or six-shooters here. But in terms of the social premise, absolutely. This is the frontier. This is the Wild West. Lost Mine of Phandelver is a Western in the same way that Gran Torino is a Western, in the same way that Logan is a Western, in the same way that El Camino is a Western. And you could do worse than looking to those movies for a bit of inspiration.
Slap at the bass, mama. Slapping the bass, mama.
There you go.
Slap at that bass, mama. I slap at that bass.
So, to recap, tone is the attitude of the narrator. In the case of D&D, that's the DM. This adventure doesn't have a really strong tone to begin with, so it's up to you to discover your own voice and perspective on the adventure. But I do encourage you to be earnest and not to undermine yourself too much with self-deprecating humor. Mood is the atmosphere of a scene, or of the story as a whole. Try to make sure that every scene has some discernible mood. Use all 5 senses to create atmosphere. Move from general to specific. Start with striking details. Be obvious or even blunt in your descriptions. And re-establish mood often. Themes are what your story is about, conceptually. I think Lost Mine of Phandelver includes themes of working together, strength through diversity, the risks and rewards of ambition, and reclaiming your roots. But themes are discovered. Don't try to force anything. Just see what your players connect with and build on that. Finally, genre is a way of communicating expectations to the audience. Your players are probably showing up for a medieval fantasy game, right? Make sure you're on the same page about what that actually means, though. Is this going to be Game of Thrones or Monty Python? It's okay to mix genres a little bit, too. Like, don't be afraid to dip your toes into whatever strikes your fancy. Our playthrough, watch highlights here on YouTube, or check out the full adventure over on Patreon. Our playthrough took a dark turn into gothic horror, and I think it was a lot of fun. Lost Mine of Phandelver, in my opinion, has a few things in common with the Western genre, though. Is that the sort of story you'd be interested in telling? Give it some thought. Ultimately, your adventure will have tone, mood, themes, and genre. Be mindful of those things. It's okay to discover things as you go along, but try to lean into your creative choices. Commit to them. Reinforce them. And remember, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. That's it for this episode. Remember that I believe in you, and the best thing you can do is fail and try again. Like, comment, and subscribe. Check us out over on Patreon if you want to watch our full playthrough of the Lost Mine of Phandelver adventure, and I'll see you next time.